Today's video is about 8 early signs that you're in a toxic relationship. The early stages of a relationship can be really wonderful. You are absolutely head over heels for your new squeeze. Everything can be going absolutely great, but the trouble is, you've been here before. Your last toxic relationship seemed perfect at this point. Of course it did. In this video, we're going to show you some of the earliest signs that your relationship might not actually be as good as it looks to begin with. It might be toxic. Understanding these signs lets you see your relationship more clearly. If you're in a toxic relationship, the earlier you can get out, the less it's going to hurt. And the less your self-confidence and your self-esteem are going to be damaged. So it's really important that we learn to see these signs early. Before we get into the details of how you can tell that your relationship is toxic, even at the very start, I just want to let you know about some of the fantastic new content we have coming out soon. If you're unhappy in your relationship or you're not sure how to find a great relationship, I'm going to be here to help you. We're going to talk about how to cope if you feel ignored in your relationship, how to talk about what you need in your relationship, and even help you to think clearly about whether your relationship is actually good for you at this point in time, or even just whether it's going to be good in the long term. So we're going to help you understand what he might be thinking and why he's acting in a way that makes no sense to you. I don't want you to miss out on any of this really important information. So please do hit that subscribe button, because that way you'll get notified just as soon as I've got a new video for you, and I can help you find the kind of happy, healthy relationship that you really do deserve. Anyway, so back to our topic for today. One of the biggest problems with a toxic relationship is that it's incredibly difficult to realize that you're in one. They're subtle, and they don't usually start out bad. In fact, one of the things we're going to talk about is the way that they usually start out feeling really, really great. The toxicity and the damage starts to happen only once we're really invested. There isn't a big glowing neon sign that tells us that our relationship might be toxic. So what can we do? Well, there isn't a single sign, but there are lots of little clues. And just one of these alone isn't going to prove that you're in a toxic relationship, but at least you can start to be a little bit more alert. And if you have several of these signs, you might want to think really clearly about whether you should be continuing with your current relationship or whether it might be time to start looking for something healthier. Here are the signs. Number 1 is love bombing. Now, you've probably already heard about love bombing. It's when somebody goes completely over the top and they make you feel like you are the absolute center of their world. But it's not sustainable, although they will never admit that. Now, lots of abusers will start their relationships with love bombing. It's the very first step in grooming you to accept their abuse later in the relationship. I know it sounds like an extreme term, but it's accurate. The main problem with love bombing is that it lowers your defenses and encourages you to get reattached too quickly. They're pushing the relationship towards more and more intimacy, and you feel swept along. You also feel secure that your love and affection and care are going to be returned, because at the moment they are. Now, it's normal to make a little bit more effort in the early stages of a relationship, but try to think carefully about whether the way your new partner is treating you is going to be sustainable in the long term. One good test of whether someone is love bombing you or not is how they react if you ask them to slow down a little bit. Now, if they're genuine, they're probably going to feel a little bit embarrassed at their own eagerness, but they're going to respect you asking them to take things more slowly. A love bomber will probably say that they're okay with slowing things down, but their actions aren't going to match their words. Now, the second sign is jealousy. Jealousy can be an early sign of a toxic relationship, but it's not completely straightforward. Jealousy is an emotion, and it's totally normal for anyone to sometimes feel jealous in a relationship. Feeling jealous and even expressing that emotion can be a sign of a healthy relationship, but it can also be a sign of a toxic relationship. If you're confused, that's okay. This is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to break it down for you a little bit more. Feeling jealous is okay. Telling your partner that you feel jealous sometimes is also okay. Expecting them to change their behavior to stop you feeling jealous is not okay. Instead, a healthy approach to jealousy is say something along the lines of, I'm feeling really jealous right now. It's not because you're doing anything wrong, and I don't want you to change what you're doing. I just wanted you to know and understand how I'm feeling while I work through it. If you find a guy who says that, cling on. Really gold star then. Now, often jealousy in a toxic relationship is framed as someone being insecure or even a sign of just how much they love you. Now, jealousy actually has nothing to do with how someone feels about their partner and everything to do with how they feel about themselves. So just to be completely clear, if somebody tells you that they're feeling jealous, but they take responsibility for those feelings, that's a really big green flag in my book. If they become jealous and they try to link it to your behavior or try to explain why it's a good thing, that is an early sign of a toxic relationship. So the third sign we're going to talk about is that you feel off balance. Again, this is a sign that's often pretty normal in the early stages of a relationship, which means it's really hard to know whether it's a warning sign or not. Now, when you're first getting to know someone, you're not really sure how they're going to respond to something. Everything's new, everything's different. And this can leave you feeling a little bit unsure and off balance. In a healthy relationship, this will usually go away pretty quickly as you guys get used to each other. But if this feeling of being uncertain or off balance, if it lingers, then it might be a sign that you don't actually trust them as much as you'd like to, as much as you're trying to convince yourself you do. Now, when we're falling for someone, we can try to convince ourselves that we trust them implicitly. But this off-balance feeling is often your subconscious telling you that you don't actually trust them really deep down. Now, the fourth sign is that you make all the compromises. Okay, so this one's normally a pretty clear sign of a toxic relationship. If you're the only one who makes compromises, first of all, that isn't a compromise, but it's not an equal relationship. Now, if you're a generally nice person, you probably don't mind too much making compromises to make your partner happy. The problem comes when this becomes a habit, or if he refuses to accept or acknowledge that your needs are important as well. Now, I'm going to give you an example from my life. I have an ex who is actually a really, really, really lovely guy. We're still good friends, but when we first got together, he always saw compromises as something he had to win. I think it's probably because he had a younger brother, and that was just a part of how their family dynamic worked. The brothers were always trying to win against each other. But this meant that he was never willing to meet me halfway or give up on something that he wanted or just a part of what he wanted so that I could get some of what I needed too. Now, if we'd carried on like that, with me compromising and him refusing to give up anything that he wanted, it would have become a toxic relationship. It didn't because of how he reacted when I explained how his approach to compromises made me feel. Once he understood that him refusing to compromise left me feeling unimportant, he wanted to change. So only being the one to compromise can be an early sign of a toxic relationship, but how he responds when you bring that up is way more important. The fifth sign is that there are some topics you just can't talk about. Now, when you're in a relationship with someone, you should be able to talk about pretty much anything. If there are topics that you don't feel you can talk about, that's often a sign that you're in a toxic relationship. Now, sometimes it is just a sign of poor communication skills. That's not great, but you can probably work on that as a couple. There is a more worrying cause, however, is that it can be a sign that he's trying to control you in your relationship. Whether he shuts down the conversation, gets angry, or just makes you feel so uncomfortable that you start to self-censor and not even bring topics up. If you don't feel safe enough to talk about certain topics because you're worried about his reaction, that's a really worrying sign of a toxic relationship. Number 6 is that you don't know how to disagree. Now, this can be quite a surprising sign of a toxic relationship for many people. After all, not having any disagreements or arguments sounds like the perfect relationship, doesn't it? Well, yes and no. Not having big rom-com style rows and storming out is definitely a good thing. But you do need to be able to disagree about things. Honestly, I don't think I've ever met anyone in my whole life that I agree with about absolutely everything under all circumstances. We don't get everything right. And we need our partners sometimes to be the ones to disagree with us, show us a different viewpoint, and even sometimes to help us realize that we're actually just wrong. We can be wrong about something. And if you never have any arguments or disagreements with your partner, one of you is almost certainly keeping something back. Now, this could be because they're afraid or they're uncomfortable or even that they're trying to manipulate you. But either way, it's not a good sign. Now, gaslighting is number 7. So we've talked about gaslighting before in my video on red flags that you should never ignore in a man. So please do check that out if you want more information on gaslighting. But to put it briefly, gaslighting is when someone behaves in a way that's designed to make you doubt yourself and to doubt your interpretation of the world. It's one of the ways that a lot of abusers will keep someone in a relationship, and it is shockingly effective. It's more common later on in an abusive relationship, but lots of abusers will throw in a little bit of gaslighting to see how you respond. It's a way of setting the stage so that they can abuse you more easily later, and they're trying to gauge how you respond to this. Now, they'll usually start by gaslighting you over something completely unimportant. They might correct you about something that you know for a fact to be true. I know someone who told me that I hadn't seen something in a shop at a specific price because that thing just couldn't be sold that cheaply. Now, this wasn't a difference of opinion. He kept pushing me to say that I was wrong and that I hadn't seen something that I had. And that's gaslighting. Now, unlike some of the signs that we've talked about so far, this isn't something that can sometimes be harmless. This isn't context dependent. Gaslighting is never healthy. Even if it's not actually abusive yet, it's going to escalate. Gaslighting, even the littlest, tiniest bit, is an enormous red flag. The next sign is boundary pushing. Boundary pushing is another big warning sign of abuse, and it's definitely something that happens in an awful lot of abusive relationships. Boundary pushing is when you set a boundary. For example, I don't want us to have sex yet, or I'm busy on Tuesdays, please don't call me. And he pushes you to change or adjust that boundary to suit him better. This might be asking for something to change or suggesting compromises. Now, spoiler alert, you don't need to compromise on boundaries. That's not how boundaries work. It's also not how compromise works. Boundaries are there to keep you safe, both physically and emotionally. They are your decision and your decision alone. Now, when you allow someone to push your boundaries, they feel secure and able to push them more and more and more. It also gets you into the habit of saying yes to them. Now, this is a scarily powerful tool. It's used in sales and marketing industry. It's even used in hostage negotiations. When you get used to saying yes over and over and over, it becomes increasingly difficult to say no. Now, again, boundary pushing is a really big red flag. It's okay for the other person to ask questions so that they're sure they really understand where your boundaries come, and they might even be curious about why you have that boundary, and that's okay. But the most important thing is that they respect it. There is a world of difference between, okay, if that's your boundary, I completely respect that. I would like to understand it a little bit more, though. Can we talk about that sometime? And, but why? I want to. If you're feeling pressured or your boundaries are being pushed, honestly, trust your instincts. Also, whining isn't sexy. This isn't an exhaustive list of signs of toxic or abusive relationships. And if those are something that you want to learn more about, we have loads more videos coming up, and we already have some there for you. But these are some of the earliest signs to help you see whether your relationship might be something that's going to be a problem going forward. As I mentioned at the start, one of the most difficult things about toxic relationships is that they're so difficult to identify early on. And as you might have guessed from what I've said so far, some of these can be worked on and the relationship can become healthy in the long run. For me, boundary pushing and gaslighting are the most worrying signs that we've talked about in this video. They're the ones that give you a really clear get out of here signal. The others are just warning signs. Like when a light comes on in your car, it doesn't mean you need to throw out your car, but you do need to understand what's going on and potentially put some effort into fixing it. So what about you? Have you seen some of these signs in your relationships? Maybe you've ignored them and regretted it later. Or maybe you've noticed them early on and feel like you've had a narrow escape. Do let me know in the comments. And as always, please like and subscribe. I'm going to give you loads more thoughts and advice on how to have happier and healthier relationships. That's it for early signs that you're in a toxic relationship, and I'll see you all soon.